Okay, so this is the first Pseudo Intellectuals podcast episode, and my name's Maika.
My name is Jimi.
And we will be your speakers
Hosts.
forever. Yeah.
It's a momentous occasion.
This is huge.
Dystopian kids in the future will be reading about this moment in textbooks from the rubble.
That they will be. So, maybe we should explain a little bit about what we're going to get into, or like what we're all about, or what direction we're going to head with just the podcast in general.
Okay, yeah. So we're just going to be talking about whatever we really feel like talking about every episode.
Yeah.
But we're going to have a center post topic each episode that we kind of revolve around, although I expect that we will stray pretty far from it on some occasions, although we'll do our best not to. That's a promise that I cannot make.
Yeah, and I think it's just going to be pretty much, well, just everything he said, but it's going to be a natural conversation pretty much is what this whole thing is going to be, right?
Yeah, very, very loosely structured. Very loosely structured.
And with that, our first episode is going to be on Thomas Nagel's paper, What Is It Like to Be a Bat? And
consciousness in general.
Yeah, consciousness in general. So Jimmy was actually the one who went ahead and picked out this paper for us to go ahead and read through, and thought up of the idea of highlighting and taking some notes on it. So we're here today, and we're going to be talking about some of the things that Thomas Nagel talks about in this paper, and also just talking in general about everything. Are we swearing? Who are we trying to reach here?
We're absolutely fucking swearing. Definitely fucking swearing.
So I'm curious to see what you think about with this whole paper, because I think with my perspective, I had to go on Wikipedia just to like double check my interpretation of the paper. Yo, and yours came out printed way different than mine.
Yeah, I printed mine out at work.
Look, mine's is all small text and shit.
Yeah, that was nice. But the reason that I want to talk about consciousness first in our first episode is because it's the only reason that anything matters. It's the only, without consciousness, then anything else that we will ever talk about on this podcast is literally worthless.
Yeah.
Like, no matter what it is, the complexity of a black hole or the beginning of the universe doesn't matter.
Or the taste of a muffin, or
exactly.
Or playing sports, or even like understanding what the events of some external forces maybe that's all consciousness. But I think even this idea that this was pretty huge, and I think Sam Harris brought this up on his latest podcast about I forgot who his guest was, but he brought that same
Anil Seth.
Yeah, and he brought up that same point that consciousness is the most important thing that they could possibly talk about.
Definitely.
Yeah. Is that something that you've always held true? Because his guest, Anil, how do you say it?
Anil. I think it might be Anil. That's
We're butchering this dude's name. If ever we want to
talk to him,
yeah,
it's over.
What did you say my name was? You
say my name was Anal.
Is this Anal Seth? Click.
Yeah, that's a bad start. No, it's either anal or anal. I want to say anal, so that's what we're gonna go with.
Yeah. So, but is that a view? Because for the longest time that I've known you, you have been about like talking a whole lot of bullshit about consciousness. But is that a view that you've always had, that consciousness is like the most important thing, all encompassing, right? Is that your view? That
definitely.
Because that's a view that definitely Sam Harris shares too.
Yeah, and luckily it's not just, for me, it's not just the most important thing, but it's also what I'm most interested in. So that's, I don't want to say it's always been that way for me, but since I've been thinking about things like this, it's always been that way for me. And it's because it's so interesting. And I think that the reason that it is because when I was younger, like since I grew up religious and I had the idea of like the soul was consciousness. Like that's what gave humans vitality. And once you dismiss that and you realize like, oh no, this is coming from somewhere, it becomes really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I thought Sam Harris's guest too. Well, he was actually pretty interesting in his own right, because he was dealing with like almost everything dealing with consciousness. He has, I think, what was it? His lab or whatever, the school he's going to, and he's just kind of grouped a whole lot of things dealing with like virtual reality or artificial reality. And
oh yeah, like in his research center.
Yeah,
that must be a cool job.
Yeah, and that was pretty much the main point they were both coming up on. Like, just consciousness is just everything.
Yeah, and it's actually a fairly controversial topic within philosophy.
Why
because so many people have different ideas about it.
Yeah.
And the reason that I wanted to read and discuss this specific paper by Thomas Nagel is because it's one of the first times that's really been put out about the idea of qualia. And David Chalmers took this idea and he went a lot further with it, and that's what he's really known for.
David Chalmers,
yeah. I think he's the one who coined the term qualia. But it's this idea of subjective experience, that there's something about that it's something to be like something else.
Yeah.
So if you ask the question, what is it like to be a rock, doesn't make sense. Like that's an intractable question. But if you ask the question, what's it like to be me, then you don't even have to think about that. Like without thinking any deeper, like in a philosophical sense, like, okay, it is something to be like me. Like that is an experience, and it's this idea of subjective experience that makes this so interesting.
So it was David Chalmers that came up with that question first. It's something to be like.
No, it was Nagel.
Oh, okay.
It was Nagel, but David Chalmers is the one who coined the term qualia, and that's the name that he gave this idea. The qualia is essentially subjective experience. Like it really is just experience. Like it's the fact that there is an experience that goes with seeing certain things. So for each person, they have distinctive qualia for whatever. So you're wearing a reddish shirt right now. Mm-hmm. When I look at that, I'm getting a distinct qualia, different from anyone else's.
Yeah.
Like it's my experience of that shirt.
Yeah.
Now, and that's taken out of the physiological processes that give me that experience. So it's not like the light going into my eyes and this and that and my brain processing, which is all happening.
Yeah.
It's the experience that I have of that.
Yeah, and this is already, I can see moving into the paper, so I think we're just going to move into it, because I did have some thoughts directly related to that, where, like, I can't recall where exactly in the paper it kind of sparked the idea, but along with your subjective experience of, like, looking at my shirt, and then you having your own experience of that, I think, well, I also had this thought that aside from the present moment happening of you experiencing that, like looking at the red shirt, there's also a bunch of, and I would say that this also plays into your whole experience, your past experiences.
Yeah, no,
Does that?
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. And this is where you can break it down further, because there's different, like, you don't have to group every moment into one qualia. So there's the qualia, there's the experience of me seeing the red. Then there's the experience of me recognizing that that's a shirt, or thinking of other times that I've seen red or seen a shirt, or me knowing that it is a shirt. Like,
Yeah.
that those are all distinct moments. Like, what it feels like to recognize a shirt, what it feels like to recognize that it's the color red, what it feels like to remember, to experience the memory of some past red shirt that I've seen.
And then using, exactly. And that's what he's getting at in this paper, right? Thomas Nagel. Right?
Yeah,
I would assume I don't know if he is trying to get at that.
Well, I think that the real point that underlies the entire paper is that at the time he was worried that philosophers were discounting this idea.
Yeah.
That it's not, they weren't discounting it, but they were being so reductionist in their ideas.
And he used the word sidestepping.
Yes,
just
exactly.
Completely sidestepping the whole just consciousness itself.
He saw that everyone was saying, if only we could get it down to the neural correlates, for instance, we'll have solved the problem. So physicalist and materialist were saying it comes from physical matter. Like it's the brain. And I would agree it is, and I think he agreed it is the brain. But that still doesn't explain where this experience aspect comes from. And David Chalmers used a very well-known thought experiment called philosophical zombies, which was basically this idea of imagining a version of yourself that's the same in every regard, except it's not conscious. So it's essentially a robot. It acts as you do. It even thinks the thoughts of being conscious, but the lights are off, to use a phrase that's often associated with consciousness.
Yeah.
So he was trying to show that there's no reason why all the physical processes couldn't be there without consciousness. Now, I think there's a problem with this, because I think that that's impossible. I don't think that you could have something that's exactly the same and yet doesn't have consciousness, because whatever whatever is causing consciousness gets carried along with it. But the idea still holds that there's nothing, and I believe Nagel says it. He says he talks about how there's nothing about physical matter. Yeah, he says, at the present time, the status of physicalism is similar to that which the hypothesis that matter is energy would have had if uttered by a pre-Socratic philosopher. We do not have the beginnings of a conception of how it might be true. So, and this paper was written a little bit ago, and still, to this day, there's nothing. I mean, there's nothing that we have learned about matter that would somehow carry consciousness into it. There's just nothing that we know where we can say, oh yeah, of course, if you put these two unconscious particles together, then this is where consciousness comes from. Like, there's nothing about matter that even begins to seem like it would carry subjective experience along with it. And go ahead.
I thought it was interesting. He was starting to get towards that point of bringing in a possible solution, right? Am I reading that right? At the end, he's he's talking about possibly bringing in some kind of.
I don't think that he.
Is that not a suggestion of some kind of?
His suggestion was that we need a way to identify subjective experience closer than we do now, and he said that might be a beginning. So
so it's right there on like 449, and
yes, exactly.
This should be regarded as a challenge to form new concepts and devise a new method. An objective phenomenology not dependent on empathy or the imagination.
Yeah, and then he says, one might try, for example, to develop concepts that could be used to explain to a person blind from birth what it is like to see. Then a little bit further, he says, the loose intermodal analogies, for example, red is like the sound of a trumpet, which crop up in the discussions of this subject, are of little use. That should be clear to anyone who has both heard a trumpet and seen red. Yeah. But structural features of perception might be more accessible to objective description, even though something would be left out. And I think that there's it's an interesting thought, and it would be nice, but clearly he couldn't think of something because he doesn't mention anything. And after having read that, I couldn't, and even now I can't. I can't think of a possible way that you could describe a color, just to take something basic, to a blind person, to get them to even begin to comprehend it, to understand what it is really like. And that's the problem with subjective experience. And it's ineffable. And the only way that you can describe it is to someone who's also experienced it. And every once in a while you get those moments where you really feel like the person understood. Yeah. You know? And like you see it, like, and you see it in each other, like, you know what you're talking about. But even then, is it the same? Like, do you understand? It may be closer to what you're experiencing than, say, someone else, but even then, it's not your subjective experience. And that's someone who's experienced the same thing. Like, that's someone who's also seen red. Yeah. And yet you still don't know. Like, you're still only so close. So I really don't know how you could get someone, how you could possibly develop objective descriptions of subjective experience. The whole It's in the definition. It's subjective. It's per the subject that's experiencing.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, and he thinks, Nagel mentions it because he thinks that getting something closer to that would help move towards a better description. But I don't know if that's true.
I did have like a thought about that, and I'm wondering what you think about virtual reality maybe playing a part in being able to help assist in sharing subjective experiences.
I think that could work, but here's the thing. You would need, because I thought too, like, what if you somehow had a chip in someone's brain and you could manipulate their consciousness and make it so they literally were experiencing what you experienced.
Yeah.
Like they were having your subjective experience. And Nagel mentions it in the paper. He basically says you could, to imagine what it's like, so for me to imagine what it's like to be you, I would have to be you.
Yeah.
So say you could manipulate my consciousness so it is yours, like exactly like yours for a moment. But then I'm understanding what it's like to be you as you, not understanding what it's like to be you as me. You understand?
Yeah.
And so with virtual reality, what you'd have to do is somehow give me the experience of being you, then put me back to being myself, and somehow letting me hold on to that experience.
Yeah.
And the trouble is, even if you could, you're only giving it to me. You can't describe it, and this is where I think this is a good time to bring up DMT, because it's the same exact thing. You are changing your consciousness, and even then, it's you. It's still you. Like you're not giving yourself the experience of someone else. It's still your experience, but it's so radically different than what you're used to experiencing that even holding on to the memory of your own experience and really remembering how it was to be that way is difficult.
Yeah.
And then explaining it to someone else, forget about it. It's just impossible.
Yeah, fucking that, and that was because that's that was a cool segue. The DMT thing is definitely like a good example of the struggle of like trying to describe that experience.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's unique because it's an experience that you actually want to. Normally, like, you're not coming up to people and being like, I have to explain to you how it is to be me right now.
I'm literally doing that every day.
Like,
right now.
That no one does that, you know?
I'm a DMT prophet. I'm prophesizing.
No, but that's different because that's something worth explaining.
Yeah.
But normally people don't even try, so they don't even realize how difficult it is to describe experience to begin with. But when you have an experience like DMT, that's something that you want to go to the mountaintop and shout about. And so you begin to realize how difficult experience is to objectify or even to just bring into language. And Nagel talks about this. He talks about how difficult it is to put something into language, especially something as complex as experience. He talks about how some things are just impossible to explain. He says, but one might also believe that there are facts which could not ever be represented or comprehended by human beings, even if the species lasted forever, simply because our structure does not permit us to operate with concepts of the requisite type. And I think that's really interesting. It basically says there are certain things that are literally ineffable. Like, we just don't, as human beings, there just aren't linguistic concepts that exist or could be discovered that can explain it.
Yeah.
And I think that conscious experience, he doesn't say that it is. He says that he's basically postulating that it may be, but I think that it is. I mean, I don't know how you could ever experience regular
through
language.
Yeah, language.
When you think of an everyday experience, you might think, no, there has to be a way. But when you go deeper into a psychedelic trip, then you realize it's just impossible. Like, what could you possibly say to describe it? You know?
Well, they kind of get into that podcast Invisibilia with the whole emotional intelligence. They have this emotion that they were getting into, that this tribe, I forgot where they're located, but it's this word that they use to describe a whole lot of things, but they tend to be for really intense situations. And it's sort of like a release of energy. Like, the tribe uses the word, like, I forgot what the name of the word was, but...
Oh, it's a word that doesn't translate to English?
Anything, yeah.
Oh, okay. There's actually a few words like that throughout the world, different languages.
And that brings up where where language maybe could have that ability to share subjective experience, maybe.
But it doesn't give it an objective description. So the idea is, could you explain a DMT trip to someone that hasn't had it? Mm-hmm. You understand?
Yeah.
So that's where it comes in. I mean, even if you made a word up to describe what you're feeling, and say someone learned that word from birth, so they really incorporated it into their linguistic sphere, their psychological sphere of language, that word would be useless to them. Like, they would know, okay, so this is like, this word means like this kind of feeling that you get on DMT, and it kind of feels like this, or kind of feels like that, or kind of feels like this. But I'll tell you what, I read Earwood for months before I first tripped on mushrooms, and it still blew my mind. It did nothing for me, really. At the end of it all, it told me nothing. You know, like people saying how they felt like they were one with everything, and it sounded ridiculous.
Yeah.
And once I did it, then I realized, this is what they were talking about. Yeah. Then if there was a word that had been invented to capture that, then that word would have made sense to me.
Yeah, but only after.
Only after. Yeah. And that's the problem, because when you get really specific, like, what is it like? Because even those very narrow concepts, like the feeling of the sense of self on psychedelics, even that is broad compared to how does Jimmy feel when he looks at Maika in this very moment. Mm-hmm. You understand?
Yeah.
So, like, even those very narrow concepts associated with tripping on psychedelics are broad compared to the individual, like the individual experience of everyday life. And there's just no way to explain it. Like, I can't explain to you what it's like to be me right now. It's just, I wouldn't know where to even begin.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because the reason Nagel brings it up is because he says that it might help in moving the right direction towards a explanation of consciousness. I really don't know how that would help. It's interesting because it's true on how impossible it is to describe conscious experience.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if that's necessary to get from physical matter to consciousness.
Yeah.
And maybe it is just everything is conscious on some like low level hum, you know? Like maybe there is like some type of experience in everything. That's panpsychism, or there's this idea pan-proto-psychism, which is basically the components for consciousness is in everything.
Okay.
And it's only once those components get together, but they're always there. But even if that's true, where are they? Because the reason that this question is so interesting is because it really makes you wonder about physicalism, about whether there just is the physical world, or whether experience is something that inhabits its own separate world, you know?
Yeah.
Like it's the mind-body duality. Like whether there really is a dualism between mental phenomena and physical phenomena. Like if they really are somewhere else in a sense, you know?
Yeah.
Which is interesting. I don't know if that's true. I my intuitions tell me that it's not, but in the same sense, where do you categorize like experience? Like what you are experiencing right now, where is that? Is that it's not physical, you know? Maybe it comes from the physical, but it's not like something I can grab onto.
Yeah.
You know? So it's interesting. It really is.
Yeah, that is real interesting because it like then you can also get into like even wondering about like the discoveries they have come upon for how consciousness does work. Where I think one of the
like the neural correlates.
Yeah. Or just even that like it might just be I think it was described as it's not just information but the way
It's integrated?
Yeah.
The pattern?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think they were using the example of a wave and then
Max Tegmark.
Yeah, was he the one?
He is. Yeah, the idea that a wave goes across the ocean, but the water molecules are just moving up and down.
Yeah.
They're not crossing the ocean. They're staying in place, moving up and down. It's the pattern of the wave that continues, and that his idea is that consciousness is just that pattern, and that qualia or subjective experience is just the way information processing feels. There's a feel to it, which is interesting. That makes sense to me, and yet there's really no answers in that description.
Yeah, for this. Yeah,
you know what I mean.
Still for the subconscious experience.
There's no. Okay, so that's how information feels when it's being processed. Why? There's really no description in that. Like what David Chalmers calls the hard problem, which the easy problem is just finding the neural correlates.
Yeah.
Like what is the pattern according to Max Tegmark? The hard problem is, okay, so that's what is causing consciousness.
Yeah.
Now, why is it causing consciousness? That's the hard problem. Why? Why does this specific pattern cause consciousness? And it gets to a point where there really is no answer at the moment, and who knows if there ever will be. Like Nagel said, there might be some things we can never understand. There's actually a theory of consciousness called Mysterianism, and it's the idea that certain things, and it's actually not really a theory of consciousness, I don't believe, but it's just a theory in general about certain things being inaccessible to the human mind. So basically, there's certain things in the universe that we will just never know, and some people categorize consciousness into that, into Mysterianism, that there'll never be an explanation. But
who came up with that?
I actually don't know.
Oh.
I actually don't know who came up with Mysterianism. But Nagel talks about it. He doesn't refer directly to Mysterianism, but he talks about how there might be some things that we can never know regarding consciousness. But I would like to talk more about, or maybe switch gears into more the nature of consciousness and not the cause, because I think that's really where the most substantial conversation is to be had, because that's really what we deal with. The reason for consciousness, the cause of it, is super interesting, but it's not something that really affects our daily life, But I think that the nature of consciousness does. I mean, it must. The fact that we have a daily life is because of the nature of consciousness.
Well, you're gonna have to explain what the nature is. So,
well, I mean, there's many different angles that you can come at this.
What's the first one on your paper? It says qualia.
No, well, that's what we already talked about, the hard problem. I think that we could go right into the self, the sense of self and free will, which I think go hand in hand and pertain directly to consciousness, the conscious sense of self.
Yeah. Well, so just explain, not for anybody at home, but just for me, because I don't know, but a sense of self. What
I mean by that?
Yeah.
So the idea,
or just define it.
So I think that for this conversation we should define it as a sense of agency, or a sense of subject object, that you are here and you are acting and things are acting on you, so that there is a center to your experience, and that center is you, and everything is happening to you. And so that's the subject object aspect, and the agency aspect is that you are the one acting. So, which, for the record, I don't believe either exist. I mean, I'm quite certain that neither exist.
That neither the self.
That the self doesn't exist in regards to agency, and the self doesn't exist in regards to subject object, in regards to experiences happening to you.
Yeah.
And this has been talked about a lot by a lot of different people, but I will say that that I think free will is super important in regards to this, because
just for the discussion's sake, I would imagine.
Yeah, no, of course. And I think that free will is super important in regards to this, because without a self, there is no free will. There is no agent to be acting. And without free will, there can't be a self. If there is no agency, then how could there be an agent? And I suppose that the latter could be argued against, because you could say that you're just like, no, there isn't free will, but yes, there is a self. You're just this consciousness strapped to a rocket, or like a roller coaster, and you're on a single track. A roller coaster is a better analogy, because you're on a track that you can't stray from. Well, actually, I have a really good analogy. Actually, it's a roller coaster, but it's those kiddie roller coasters that have the steering wheel,
and you just spin around.
And you know how the steering wheel doesn't do anything. It's like those rides where you can turn the wheels, but it doesn't do anything.
It's on a track.
So that's literally what it's like. You're just this conscious experience, and it's not just a roller coaster, because it's not like you're making decisions and you're in your mind watching yourself make decisions, and you're like, oh my God, I can't not make this decision. I'm stuck. It's not like that. It's like the kid in the little amusement park car, and you're steering. Like, you have the experience of steering your mind, of steering your body. You have the experience of being the driver, and yet beneath you is this track that's just taking you along, and there's really no choice involved.
I guess with that explanation, you're trying to add in the whole the picture of everybody feeling like they have some kind of control.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When in reality,
the under part is really the one that is really getting at.
Yeah, and in reality, there is no driver.
Yeah.
It's that exact analogy, except for you are just the car. There is no driver in the driver's seat. The car is just imagining that driver.
Yeah.
The car has a sense that there's a driver, but you never see the driver, and you never experience the driver, but most people just, quote unquote, know there's a driver there.
Yeah.
And that's just not true. There is just the car, but just on that track going along.
That in itself is that's a pretty cool picture. I would imagine that could make for a pretty cool movie, right? Like, imagine the twist. Turns out the fucking main character was a car the whole time.
The whole time.
But
that is the twist, though.
Yeah, like we're all the car.
We are. We are all the car. I'm gonna get that as a bumper sticker. But for me, that was a twist. Like, when I first realized that we had no free will, and to be honest, when the lack of self was almost intuitive for me. I don't know why, but it just the way that I am. When I first heard that when I first read about the idea of there not being a self, it just clicked immediately, and I was like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, of course. But the lack of free will, when that first clicked for me, I was surprised by that. It made perfect sense, and I knew right away that it must be true, but it was surprising. I was like, oh my God, like, it, down to the words that are coming out of my mouth right now.
Yeah.
I have no control. Like, it's so hard to subjectively experience the lack of free will, and yet it's there, you know. And during meditation, I have in fleeting moments, the lack of self in even more fleeting moments I've also experienced. But in everyday life, it really feels like you are the one making these decisions.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just not that way. But that is an aspect of consciousness, that sense of self, and I wonder if it I mean, it must have been evolutionarily advantageous, because I don't think that it would have evolved in humans, that sense of self, and or like a sense of agency.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on maybe what are the advantages of
it?
All of this composing?
I mean, it's difficult because thinking about going through life without the sense of self, it's just like we talked about before when Nagel said, if I turned myself into Maika,
Yeah.
I wouldn't be experiencing Maika as me.
Yeah.
I'd be experiencing Maika as Maika.
Yeah.
And it's similar in that I can only imagine what living without a sense of self from the beginning would be like. So I can't really imagine, I can't really comprehend it. So thinking about it right now, it seems obvious that you'd be totally thrown off. Like if all of a sudden tomorrow you woke up without any sense of self, like you'd be done. You couldn't function, like at least for a little bit. You know, you'd be like, what is going on?
Yeah.
Like you'd think you went crazy. But being born without it, I assume maybe it has something to do with motivation and like moving, like having a value system that you move towards, like you staying alive and survival. Like you wouldn't have the motivation for that.
Where's your thought process going through right now as you're trying to? Are you thinking about like?
I'm thinking
maybe
of
what the
sense of self it does that makes it advantageous to survival, to evolution.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Because my thought process was going to like the infant in the womb, and then, but that by that process, it's already too late because obviously, like evolution has already kind of ingrained a sense of self.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
We're built to have it.
Yeah.
So you'd have to go back.
You'd have to look way back.
You'd have to evolve. You have to imagine a human being evolved without it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know what it would be like, but clearly it wouldn't be. Now, when I say more advantageous, I mean to survival.
Yeah.
Clearly it wouldn't be more advantageous to survival. Now, more advantageous to happiness? That's a different question.
Yeah.
And I think that the sense of self is a plague on happiness. There's nothing good about it. It only makes things. It only increases suffering.
Well, the sense of self. Happiness is the construct from sense of self.
I disagree, because I think that you can be happy without owning that happiness as you. You can still experience happiness, but you know, capital Y, you know, the ego isn't experiencing, like it's not. That isn't you being happy. It's just happiness, the experience of happiness.
Mm-hmm.
And I do want to say that so often people get stuck here because they say, okay, this feeling in my knee, that's not me. I got that. this feeling of anger that I have, that's not me. That's just an experience.
Yeah.
That's just, I got that. This thought that just came in my head, that's not me. But this awareness that's noticing all of that.
Yeah, that's also.
But this is where people get stuck because they say, that's me.
Yeah.
That's me. Like that awareness, seeing it, that's me. How could that not? But you. And people often have difficult time describing this. I've heard it on so many occasions where people, when asked that question, like, what about the awareness? How is that awareness, that subjective experience? How is that not me? Like, how that is somebody, that's something, that's something. And the best way that I've learned to describe it is that there isn't, you're misunderstanding that awareness. There is no awareness like that. Like you're making it awareness centric, and it isn't that way. Like you're lapsing into that center self that everything is revolving around, that experiences are happening to. That's not how awareness works. If you really notice it, awareness is something, consciousness, quote unquote, is just something that arises with each experience. So you're not noticing that anger arise and then pass away, to use Buddhist terminology. What you're noticing is the awareness of anger arising with the anger, simultaneously, and then passing away with the anger. And you might say, well, no, because I'm still here. Like there's still, like the anger comes up, the anger goes away. Well, what about what's there, was there before, and what's there after? That's just other awareness. That's just other, like you're always aware of something.
Yeah.
And so there's always something there, like the background of your mind or whatever it is. There's always an awareness there, but it's not. There is no center awareness that sees everything. It's each thing arises with its own. It arises conscious. There's the experience of anger, and then the experience fades away. There's the experience of, and you're not seeing that experience. You're not experiencing that experience with another awareness. There's just the awareness of that experience with it, and that fades away.
Yeah.
If you think you're experiencing it through something else, that's really just an awareness of another experience that you've attached to it. So say you're like, oh, well, anger arises, anger passes away, but I can feel it in my body or something. Well, no, that's because that experience of feeling your body has its own awareness that's arisen with it. And if that experience were to fade away, then that awareness would fade away as well. And so there is no center self-awareness that is being aware of all this. Each individual experience is aware of itself. And it's interesting because it makes me wonder, and this kind of goes back to the panpsychist idea, it makes me wonder if, take these microphones for example, at what point, how complex would these microphones have to get before they literally are hearing? And it would be, we couldn't even begin to imagine that experience of just pure audio. No mind, no sight, no body feeling, just hearing. Do you know?
Yeah.
At what point would the microphone have to, at what point would the complexity of the microphone have to get to before that?
Before we consider it.
Yeah, before it's experiencing audio and nothing else. So I wonder, because there is information processing involved with that. But But clearly, no matter how complex and how amazing that this microphone could really experientially hear sound, we would never think that it has a self. And yet we ascribe a self to us because we have all this awareness going on all at once, when really it's just a bunch of separate stuff tied together, networked. It's just network independent experiences.
And that's like an interesting point. I like the point that you brought up with the arm having that experience where the body is experiencing a pain right there. Well, first that thought, because that kind of that's what you were getting at with the microphone too, right? Because or at least that's how I was getting, like, connecting to the microphone thought you were just having right here, that with the body, like, having an experience of pain, there's a possibility that maybe at some level the microphone is experiencing.
Right, yeah. The panpsychist view, you know?
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's complex enough, but you could imagine that it could be.
Yeah.
And the mind is what produces this sense of self that we have.
Yeah.
And it's just another conscious experience. It's the experience of having a self, of having agency.
Yeah. Well, I want to get at that, where it's the mind that is the cause of that. And in talking about levels of complexity that would be needed to meet the requirements for experiencing something, because I feel like maybe there are organisms that, like, maybe are experiencing, maybe not in the way that we traditionally would label as an experience, but maybe like dealing with what's pleasurable and unpleasurable, right? So
like pain and pleasure.
Yeah, well, or just whatever it is, just whatever is pleasurable, like something that you would want to go towards, that anything would find pleasurable in its own way.
Right, like finding food, or
or however a cell works, it would move towards what is pleasurable, right?
Yeah, that's weird.
Or even like down to an atom, and it's probably labeled under different terms, not pleasurable.
Right.
But more, it's attracted to.
Right. Yeah. No, that's interesting. Although,
and then, because this is a theme I've been coming up across with Habits of Mind, and then this other book I read, where that tends to be the basic process of everything. Pleasurable, unpleasurable, or neutral. They tend to
like
add
desire and aversion.
Yeah.
That's interesting, but
and those terms aren't universal for everything. We'll probably call it something else.
Yeah. No, I know exactly what you're saying. That's interesting. I wonder, because you need to reach like a certain level of. It really is the sense of self that throws that in, because something else might go toward, because the real thing is, it's genetic phenotypes. Like Richard Dawkins wrote a book called The Selfish Gene, and it's this idea that genes, the genes that are passed on, are the genes that were good at reproducing at keeping themselves alive.
Yeah.
So, and like over many years through evolution, that gene brings that out more and more. So whatever helps something survive. You know, whatever keeps it, and that's a purely mathematical situation. Like there is no. It's not like it.
There is no pleasure.
Yeah, it's not like
attraction.
it wants to survive. It's just that if it doesn't, then that gene won't be passed on.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that a gene to make a certain thing pleasurable isn't passed on.
Yeah.
So what we find pleasurable or unpleasurable, there's a reason for it.
Yeah.
There's a reason behind it.
And I want to get into where math may seem to go against the whole concept of pleasure or unpleasurable, because like what are we trying to gather with math? Math is the main function for pretty much everything, right?
It's an object.
How we understand.
It's as objective as you can get.
Yeah.
Like as far as describing things objectively, that's it. There's nothing more solid than math.
Yeah. Well, because then with math you can still, and I want to get like as specific as we can with this experiment, because with math you would still be using math to get somewhere. You're still heading in a direction, a pleasurable direction, a direction you're attracted to. The math is headed.
Well, the math is just, I mean, the direction you're heading towards is just more knowledge.
More knowledge.
And if that,
more logical.
but I wouldn't, it's only pleasurable for some people.
Yeah,
There's
I guess
some people that are
that
totally
sense,
aversive to knowledge.
Yeah, definitely. But I'm talking about just the mechanics of math, and maybe just logic in itself.
Like going from one side of the problem to the other.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
You wouldn't be trying to avert yourself from the right answer or from what seems to actually be working.
Well, the interesting thing about math is that you can't if you're doing it right.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, like there's no.
Yeah, math is only going towards what's right, what works.
Yeah, as long as you are doing the calculations right. Now you might use it in the wrong way.
Yeah.
But when you get down to the actual numbers, if you're doing it right, like for whatever that specific problem is, you're getting the quote unquote right answer.
Yeah.
You know, you're moving towards that.
Yeah. That in itself seems to kind of be still kind of under that theme, right? Of just things in general moving towards what's pleasurable, or whatever term falls under pleasurable, and moving away from what's unpleasurable, or in math's case, what's false, what's logic's case, what's untrue.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know. I really don't know how that fits in, and I really don't even know how to understand it. It makes, for some reason, it's making me think of how the universe tends toward disorganization. So in the beginning of the Big Bang, the universe was highly organized, and over time it's gotten more and more disorganized. So in the beginning it was just solid, like in the first, like when they talk about the Big Bang, they talk about like the first nanoseconds, like literally like each like event or like era, of like the beginning of the universe is literally in seconds that are, I think they're smaller than nanoseconds, but like in very short periods of time.
And how do they describe that? Like
I organized to disorganized.
So, but in those, there are some assumptions of what those events are right before the Big Bang, and I assume it probably starts off with maybe like the smallest thing ever, and there was some kind of I don't know what they would describe had happened to have caused the expansion?
No, they don't know.
They don't know.
Yeah, it just I mean it happened. There's theories.
Yeah.
But there's no real. I mean, even.
And imagine that, like, if there is nothing.
Right. Well, the universe's net energy is thought to be zero. Mm-hmm. Because gravity is a negative force, has a negative energy signature, and so every bit of matter has its own gravity, no matter how big or small.
Yeah.
And so, and it's equal to the net energy, the net positive energy of that bit of matter. So I have my own gravitational energy signature, and it's exactly equal to the negative number of whatever my net energy is. So my individual net energy is zero. And the same goes for the Earth. And the same goes for the sun. And the same goes for our solar system, the galaxy, out and out and out. So the universe's net energy is zero. And so you can take zero and split zero into -1 and +1. And you still have zero.
Yeah.
But now you have -1 and +1. And so it's almost like the universe doesn't really exist.
Yeah.
Like it's still zero. Like it's like we don't exist. Non-existence has been split into a -1 and a +1. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, that is pretty crazy. And it also has me thinking about this idea of, so the event before the Big Bang, and what are the things that compose of this Big Bang?
Well, it can't even be described in that way because time came into existence
from
the Big Bang.
Yeah.
So that it was a timeless place.
Yeah.
And honestly, and I've heard a few different mathematicians, cosmologists, quantum physicists speak about this, and I still have trouble grasping. Like when they're talking about what it was, like what was there and what it was like in the moments, or again, I'm using language that doesn't make sense, but like before the Big Bang, you know?
And because that kind of relates to the consciousness problem, because considering the possibility that we may be the only conscious things in the universe that we can possibly observe right now.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know if that's true.
Yeah, I don't know either.
But there's no reason to think that it couldn't be true. Some people think like, some people use the argument, have you seen how big the universe is?
Yeah.
There has to be.
Yeah.
That makes sense too. But
that's not even really that's not attacking the problem though, right? The argument, that's kind of just using absence as its.
Yeah. And maybe there is.
So it's two thoughts I'm having with this. So the first one is dealing with the consciousness, and possibly like with how there is consciousness on this planet as compared to the rest of the observable universe, how there's all different kinds of things we can see in the universe. Sure, we may be the only things that are conscious that are able to have this, but in the grand scheme of the universe, like, are there things that maybe we aren't able to grasp in our same universe? So there's consciousness in the universe, and these other things in the universe aren't able to grasp it just because, from our perception, there has to be some kind of level which we haven't even ourselves figured out yet.
To understand consciousness?
Yeah. with or subjective consciousness, right?
Right.
And then maybe there's something to be like, I don't know, other planets, the planets themselves.
Okay.
Or not even planets themselves, but I guess what I'm trying to get at is there something other than consciousness? And I'm not even thinking on like levels compared to consciousness, where consciousness might be in the middle and there's something
higher consciousness,
or it may not even be considered higher consciousness.
So you're
it may just be like a whole different concept.
Oh, I see.
That we can't even grasp.
I
right?
see what you're saying.
Yeah?
Yeah, I do. So you're saying something like consciousness, but it isn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then like they'd probably have their own kinds of senses, and it probably wouldn't even be under the term a sense, or if it is, it wouldn't be the terms of senses as we know them.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. There's a theory of consciousness called integrated information theory. I always get it wrong.
IIT, that's what they were talking about.
Yeah, it's either integrated information or information integration. I think it's integrated information, but Tione, the philosopher Tione came up with, and there's another concept, and I forget what it's called, but it's basically this idea that what if like something out in the universe came together for consciousness to arise? Like it's taking Max Tegmark's idea of patterns, and but taking it to like a hyper macro level. So like planets creating that pattern.
Yeah.
Like something so big that the pattern still arises.
Yeah.
But it's on a massive scale.
And I think that's what I'm trying to get at. So I'm glad there is like an idea of that out there. And imagine, so how they have the patterns of the universe and solar systems and those patterns, right? Circular motion around some kind of central thing.
Right.
And those are maybe its own conscious.
Yeah.
Those are like thinking.
Yeah, no, there's...
And we are like some fucking... little nothing inside of a consciousness. Whether
that exists, I don't think there's any reason that it shouldn't. Like, there's no reason that couldn't exist. You know, if consciousness is just information processing.
If it is like that.
And that makes things interesting. You know, like once you get that, with like Max Tegmark's substrate independence, then you really can get consciousness in anything. But one of the more difficult aspects of that is something that Nagel said in his paper, and he says consciousness may never be detectable. So in anyone other than the subject. So besides the experience of the conscious, or besides the experience of the conscious experience itself, that's all you have. No one else can really know that there is a conscious experience happening. And that might just seem abstract and esoteric, but it really makes a difference when you talk about AI, whether or not AI is conscious or not. I think Nagel says...
Yeah, are you talking about the robot?
He says, there may be further implications about the form of the experience. There may even, and then in parentheses, though I doubt it, be implications about the behavior of the organism.
Yeah.
And when he says, though I doubt it, that's the important part.
Yeah.
And I agree with him because
that part I was actually questioning, and I'm glad you brought that up.
Because it's whether or not consciousness affects behavior. Do you need consciousness to have the behavior? And I think we know we don't. I mean, I know I said before, like, the philosophical zombie idea kind of falls apart because if you had something exactly the same, then it would be conscious.
Yeah.
But I think you could imagine someone building a computer, an android, a robot version of a person that is programmed to act exactly like that person. And it's such good programming that you really can't tell the difference.
Yeah.
But it's not conscious. Mm-hmm. I mean, essentially, that's the better version of the philosophical zombie argument. The unconscious AI argument. Because then there's nothing about the behavior that tells you that thing is not conscious. Or whether it is. So when we finally get along to building AI, and I don't want to get too into AI because we're going to do an episode on that eventually, but as far as the conscious aspect of it, it's going to be important at some point along the way, because that's something we want to know. We want to know if this soldier AI that's going to fight wars for us is conscious,
Yeah.
Like, whether it's super intelligent or not. Like, we don't want it to be in that case. And then, like, other people have talked about, and then if we build an AI that could potentially destroy us, we do want that to be conscious.
Yeah.
Because we want to at least leave something behind instead of some dead, empty shells, So it seems that Nagel is on the same page.
Yeah.
That consciousness does not affect behavior. Because if consciousness and behavior both result from the same thing, then they're both secondary. They can't affect each other. They're arising from the same physical process. So if a physical process causes two things, the way those two things interact won't do anything to the physical process because it's a result of that. It's consciousness and behavior are just shadows of physical process.
Or, I mean, yeah, that's what he's getting at over here, right?
Yeah, and that's what I'm agreeing with.
Yeah.
I can't imagine a way in which consciousness affects the physical process that caused behavior.
Because we're also taking into account the whole the free will thing, and
but even even in a causal framework.
Yeah.
So you don't need free will. I mean, consciousness could still affect behavior and not be free will, because your conscious experience isn't free will. There's no free will in your conscious experience.
Yeah.
But even so, something happens. Basically the way it would have to go is, because of your conscious experience, this happened. Because of your conscious experience, X happened.
Yeah.
And I can't think of a way in which that plays out. I can't think of a way in which consciousness affects X, like the outcome, because no matter what, it's only experienced by you, your conscious experience, So you would be the only one it could affect, because you're the only one experiencing it. And so it would have to be you. The fact that you are experiencing something changes something else, like the physical processes
Yeah.
in your mind or something. But the physical processes is where that consciousness came from. So you don't need that experience to affect it. It's just more physical process interacting with themselves.
Yeah.
So conscious. There's the word for it is epiphenomenal. An epiphenomenon, meaning it's separate, just caused from. It's the shadow of. So your shadow doesn't affect you.
Yeah.
There's nothing that you cause your shadow, you make it move. There's nothing though that your shadow, like that, because your shadow is there, you know what I mean, is going to affect you in that way. The only thing that I can think of is the fact that you experience, just the fact that you experience it does something. Like, because you experience this, I don't know, it gets tricky. So using the shadow analogy, it would be like, because you see your shadow, you think, I mean, let me be clear. It does affect some things.
Yeah.
Because if consciousness didn't exist and everything was just unconscious, and like everything was the same, but for some reason that aspect of reality wasn't there, so just consciousness wasn't a possible thing, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Yeah.
So it has affected reality in a way.
Yeah.
It affects things by dint of being there. Of existing in the first place. Like, it's just another thing that exists. And how far you can take that, I'm not sure. I don't know how far you can take that. Like, okay, so because this exists, it's something that we'll think about. So because we think about it, because we think about consciousness, does that affect our behavior? That, I think, is the question to be asking. Maybe. I mean, it does, right? Because you strive towards different things. Like I said, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Yeah.
So it's done this.
Yeah.
But has it done anything beyond? Has it done anything evolutionarily advantageous? Like, is thinking about consciousness advantageous to survival? I don't know. And
survival might not even be this is gonna get into some other stuff too, man.
Okay.
Damn it. Well, I don't even know if we want to get into this. We'll probably save this for a different episode. I want to write this down, but this gets into the whole survival thing, because that's gonna get into the whole death thing. And then when death is erased, and then posing that question. But I don't know if we want to. Do we want to get into that?
Yeah, I think so. I think we should. I think we can get into it a little bit.
Yeah, because survival is just trying to
not die,
stave off dying. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I actually have written down consciousness and death. It's something I wanted. I was literally looking at it, and I was going to talk about it next.
Nice. All right. Well, then, fucking, because that would be like, so survival is gonna be a concept going up against that other theme that I brought up earlier of pleasurable and unpleasurable. Because I think now, as we're stepping into this, these are two different things, and this is where that's going to start becoming more real, where we have these advances in the medical field and whatever, and they're able to figure out all this shit and prolong life and possibly even make humans live forever. Right.
But see, consciousness adds another aspect to it, and I think that it's changed the meaning of survival for us. Because when we talk about survival, we don't really mean survival. Like, if I told you, listen, Maika, you're not going to die, and you're actually still going to procreate, but we're going to give you a lobotomy, and you're going to be brain dead, but we're going to take some of your sperm and we're going to impregnate some women, so you're still going to procreate, you're still going to honor your primary directive as a human, and you're not going to die. You're still going to be alive, but you're going to be brain dead.
Well, and this is why I think that's still going towards why I think survival, and I didn't say it yet, but I think survival might not even become a question anymore. That's going to be something that we might not even worry about.
Once we live forever?
Yeah.
But even now, it's something else. Like, even now, when we talk about surviving, we mean prolonging the existence as we are now. And that's where the sense of self comes in. That sense of self is what is driving our instinct to survive. It's not staying alive and procreating anymore. Like, because consciousness evolved with the sense of self, it changed the game. And a good example is the Ascidian sea slug. And it's this slug.
Is that the one that eats its own brain?
Yeah. It locks itself in. No sense of self. Still alive, still procreating.
Yeah.
But literally doesn't exist anymore as it was. If a human could do that, it would never do that ever. Even if it was guaranteed to if someone said, I can put you in a coma and I'll ensure that you procreate and you'll live, and because of this procedure, whatever it does, you'll live 10,000 years. You say no. Even if the alternative was living for 30 more seconds, you would choose 30 seconds. You would never do that because the sense of self has become synonymous with alive. Do you understand what I'm saying? So dying has become synonymous with the death of self, not the death of the body. It's the death of the mind.
Yeah.
That's what death is. If someone said, I could transfer your brain to a computer, but your body's going to die, you would not think that you died. Like, you would still think you were alive.
Yeah.
Even once you were in a computer and your body, you could see your body, being melted in acid. Like, you would still be
You
would be alive.
Yeah,
even though there was no living organism anymore.
Yeah.
To be alive, we have associated that with the sense of self, and to understand that on a deeper level, think about someone who said, I'm going to press this button and it's going to totally change your mind into something else, into a totally different person. Even though your mind, say it was a procedure.
Yeah.
It wasn't a button, but it was like a surgery. You're going to wake up, you're going to be a different person. When that person woke up, even though it's in the same body and the body's still living, you would think that person died.
Yeah.
Like, who that person was died.
Mm-hmm.
So really, the drive to stave off death, as you put it, is really the drive to continue
to survive
the sense of self.
Yeah. To
continue self. That you don't want that sense. We are so attached to the ego that is what death means to us. The death of the ego means death. Like, that's what death is. And any other type of death that doesn't come along, that doesn't carry the death of the ego with it isn't death. You could do anything, and as long as you keep the ego in existence, we wouldn't consider that dying. It's the ego that carries that along.
Yeah. So I think with this, I think you've definitely this is definitely a definition of just survival. Yeah. Right? This whole explanation that we just went through, this was a definition of survival.
Yes. But I also think the reason for explaining it in this way is because I think that this explains why ego death during psychedelic experiences is so sought after. Because I think that the drive to survive in the definition that we just created is intrinsically filled with misery.
Yeah,
it's something it's just. I mean, it isn't the drive to survive. It's the anxiety to survive.
Yeah. But say so. Here's what I'm trying to get at. I'm trying to pose the possibility that there is no death now.
Like keeping the mind alive forever somehow.
Yeah. And then, so what is the purpose now of anything? So survival has been our drive this whole time, whether that's survival of the physical or survival of the self.
And once that was guaranteed,
yeah.
Well, I think we're already moving that way, and not towards living forever, although that as well, but towards replacing that drive to survive.
Yeah.
Because even now, like most people are trying to stave off death, and yet they want their life in the back of their mind, knowing that that's impossible. They want their life to be meaningful. They try to find something that will make them happy so that they can. It's almost like in preparation for death, so that you know that you had a good life. And I think that even if you knew you would live forever, you still don't want to suffer. Instead of becoming about staving off death, it would be about staving off suffering.
Yeah.
And honestly, I don't even think that death is what it's about. It's about staving off suffering. And it's just that we know it in our bones that dying is the worst. And it's not just dying that's the worst. Or it's not death that's the worst. It's dying.
Yeah,
it's those last moments knowing that you're about to disappear.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that sucks.
That sucks.
Or at least on DMT it didn't suck because I was like on the other side.
I wish that we could know that there was another side. That would make it way easier.
That would be super interesting if they came upon that shit for the DMT results.
Yeah, like discovered that there was another dimension.
As a whole, do you know the fucking news? Nah, the news probably wouldn't even be able to.
In case you're wondering what Mike is talking about, they're doing a study now where they're putting people in fMRI and EEG machines and giving them DMT breakthrough experiences. DMT breakthrough experiences when you take a high enough dose that you literally have the experience of leaving your body and going to another dimension. And this experience is highly repeatable and totally unexplainable. Unexplainable as in like you can't describe it, not unexplainable as we don't know like how it happens. Although we don't, but this study should reveal it.
Mm-hmm. So I kind of want to, because I don't know if we're really tackling this proposition I'm posing. Like we're still, I feel like
about living forever.
Yeah, at least not in the way that's satisfying to me. I feel like there should definitely be a little bit more discourse, I guess, on what the possibilities of direction are aside from surviving or trying to
Suffer less.
Well, because
there is a certain kind of freedom that it's going to give you.
Yeah,
A certain kind of freedom that we can't even comprehend because no one's ever had it.
I think here's where I want to just maybe play around with some thoughts. Like, so survival is no longer an issue. Nobody's gonna die. We've mastered
Defeated
traveling the universe. Nobody has to worry about having a roof over their head or meeting all the necessities for life, for living. And everybody's at some comfortable level. There's always going to be, I'm going to take this into account, there's always going to be some form of suffering. Like, hey, this motherfucker is still living way better than I am. But with these knocked out of the park now, so
it's mostly going to be existential suffering.
Yeah, and I guess in I think that would be more just in the beginning stages. Existential suffering would still just be in the beginning stages.
How do you imagine that
of the possible potential?
How do you imagine that leaving? How do you imagine us getting rid of that?
Of the existential,
like making sure that, or the existential dread that your life is meaningless.
Yeah, I think I may be taking this a little bit too much from a macro view, but the human race or whatever race is going to be surpassing all of these things we're worried about now. I think Sam Harris had brought it up where maybe it wasn't Sam Harris. I think it was in the notes, and somebody on Reddit had brought up the idea that living things were no longer worried about having to get things that they wanted or whatever. They were only focused on, and I don't know if they got to that actually, what they were focused on. And I would assume it would be focused on maybe trying to expand knowledge.
Right.
Because right now, knowledge of anything and everything seems to be limitless. Death and survival kind of have, at least in my mind, it seems to have a bit of a horizon of we like, I can kind of see where it would end. You can kind of see where you could just deplete it and then it would no longer be a worry.
But knowledge acquisition
at this moment seems pretty limitless.
Yeah, infinite.
And that'd probably be where living things would be going. At least anything with an experience of consciousness, I guess. But
I still don't see where existential dread drops away.
And I guess in that sense, it wouldn't be existential dread in what I thought or what I had associated the term with. It would be more existential dread. If I'm understanding existential dread correctly, it would be existential dread about the knowledge we're gaining now. Like, where are we going now with this knowledge? We're gaining so much knowledge. We're learning so much. And
what is it for?
Or maybe not what it's for, but where is it going? Like, there's no end in sight in everything that we're learning. Like, everything that we know now, like, down to the quartz and all that shit that you were talking about.
Yeah, the quarks and gluons.
Yeah, all that. Imagine maybe there's even more than that.
Right.
And it just keeps going. Or even the expansion of the universe or the Big Bang. What if we learn more about it? What if we get past the event of the Big Bang and it just keeps going. Maybe in that sense, existential dread would become another part of suffering, of just the whole of any conscious experience.
Although I agree, but I still think that on the individual level, people are still gonna be like, "What the fuck is my life about?"
Yeah,
And
yeah, of course.
You know,
that's
and-
gonna be at every level. Like I bet. I mean, they show it in movies all the time. It's always some fucking immortal.
Yeah.
And for some reason, they have the immortal fighting with fucking mortals.
Yeah. Like a vampire movie or something.
Or the Marvel universe.
Oh, yeah.
Like, they have their most powerful being ever.
Yeah,
and it's
yeah.
not a main character at all. It's just something the writers were able to conceive.
Yeah.
Some being that's immortal, able to transcend their own comics.
Yeah. Although, like you said, it's like impossible to conceive. At that time, you know, people will probably be super intelligent too.
Yeah.
So it's like, because we'll have modified ourselves.
Yeah.
So
Do you think that would? I'm sure that would help a whole lot with the knowledge problem.
definitely.
But would that help with
the existential problem?
the limitlessness of?
I don't think so. I think that I can't. I think that the universe probably is infinite.
Yeah.
In
And I hope it is.
Yeah.
Like the fucking survival thing is like, thinking about it now, and as I'm coming back into like the kind of lives we're living, I feel kind of like fucked up for saying it, I guess, but just survival in general is just like such a weak ass thing to be trying to like forge toward,
no, for
as compared to something limitless like acquisition of knowledge.
right.
Like, if you really are at the level of like wanting to continue learning at all, and you see you've like past experience of knowledge acquisition would tell you that there is no end in sight.
Well, that's the. I always think this about my own consciousness. Like, my conscious potential is wrapped in chains of necessity. Like, I always think about people that are billionaires, and like in a very big way, not totally, but in a very big way, the whole survival thing is gone. It's off the table. Like, they're good.
Yeah.
So they only
Have to worry about
whatever. They only have to worry about whatever they want to worry about. And that changes life dramatically. And some people have all the money in the world and they still suck as people, But I think there's plenty of people out there who could do amazing things if they unlock the full potential of their consciousness, but they're just that 95% of their conscious energy has to go towards survival.
that. This is also another one of those things that just kind of leads into the limitlessness of its own nature, and like that's the consciousness, or like people's own individual experiences where you would see, like, for example, you seeing these people's like apparent lack of need to struggle like the rest of us, and then maybe somebody else having some kind of suffering in that thought of just knowing that information, but then that problem in itself is now like just a testament to how much we don't know about human consciousness or just consciousness, because we'd have to figure that out, right? How do we get rid of that? What if it is endless? Because this is how I see it. I see that suffering or that comparison as just a bigger problem that needs to be tackled. But what if the problem can't be tackled? What if it's just like the acquisition of knowledge? What if it is an endless, just an endless want, right? I think that's the word, is just an endless want.
Yeah.
Like
there's a Buddhist term for it, dukkha.
Dukkha, yeah.
And that's the idea that everything, all phenomena is inherently unsatisfactory.
And that could be the other thing. So knowledge acquisition is the other one after survival. We're talking about what would be the purpose after survival.
Right.
So knowledge acquisition could be one. That could be the other one.
Well,
how do we get rid of suffering at all?
The way that the Buddhists tackle that is you need to get rid of desire.
Mm-hmm.
It's they believe desire is the root of all suffering. It as long as you want something, then you're going to suffer, because you're going to be disappointed every single time. Either you're going to get it and you're going to be disappointed, or you're not going to get it and you're going to be disappointed. And the only way to truly escape that cycle is by eliminating desire entirely. But the interesting thing, bringing it back to consciousness, is that at that point, who knows what kind of control we'll have over our own consciousness. Like, what if we could just press a button on, our phones that are linked to our, like, handhelds that are linked to our brain, and just change the settings, turn desire down to 0 or whatever, and would people do it? Because that's when the sense of self becomes so insidious, that you have this inherent aversion to changing yourself that way, because it's you. Even if it was something bad, like, even if someone said, take this pill and this one thing about you don't like will disappear, you'd feel weird about it at first. Like, even if you did it, for at least a second, you'd feel weird about it. Like, oh no, like, I don't want to change myself. I mean, that's why people have a problem with, like, a lot of antidepressants. So not that that's a good example, because I'm not a fan of them to begin with, but, like, just the idea of, like, changing yourself, like, you identify with however you are in that moment. And so that'll be interesting. And that's another reason why people are even aversive to the Buddhist ideology in the first place. Because they're like, I don't want to get rid of, I don't want to be, like, emotionally empty, whatever. When in reality, it's not that way. Like, there's your attachment to that is totally fabricated. Like, there's no moral reason, there's no moral value to emotions in the first place, and you can be compassionate without reacting negatively to external stimulus, no matter how bad it is. And right now, at least in our culture, we have this idea that your children or your parents or your siblings died. If you don't feel horrible, you're a moral monster. And that shouldn't be the case. You should be able to be okay. You should be able to feel happy no matter what. but it's the attachment to emotion, and in this higher consciousness state that we're like essentially talking about, who knows what is going to come along with that, like whether we'll eventually get out of that, whether we'll eventually leave the whole, maybe we'll become more reasonable, more rational, more like Spock from Star Trek.
Yeah. I don't know anything about him.
About Spock?
This is all I know.
For those listening, Mike is doing the Spock thing where you split your fingers apart.
I was just gonna bring up one more thing about the whole suffering, because, like I said, it is drawing from similar. It is drawing similar conclusions to the whole pleasurable, unpleasurable thing that seems to be inherent in almost everything. Probably not the term pleasurable, unpleasurable. It'll be applied under some different label, but you could see it like moving towards something or away from something, and maybe with the suffering or the concept of suffering, however we see it. Oh shit. It would probably be maybe I had the thought earlier. It was like I guess a dealing with in that regard. So in knowing that our suffering is just an aversion or an attraction
that is unfulfilled.
Yeah. Which would, I guess, still kind of fall under the whole knowledge acquisition thing, because if you are starting to look at suffering like that, where you are just another piece in this giant moving puzzle, then you are essentially like, in acquiring knowledge, you're figuring out how to, I don't know if suffer less is what you'd be wanting to do.
But do you really?
What?
Like, knowing that doesn't help. I mean,
Knowing
that's not
how
true.
to suffer less?
Well, knowing the root of it. It doesn't help in and of itself, is what I mean.
Yeah, because it in itself is a want, or it's...
No. I mean the knowledge.
Yeah.
The knowledge in and of itself
Yeah.
won't lessen your suffering.
Yeah.
It may show you the path to suffering less, but just knowing where it comes from, you can't just decide not to desire anymore.
Yeah, that's true.
It takes a lot of practice.
Because, well, also too, just with the whole, I would assume with that teaching, where you would prefer to be in a state of no suffering, so not wanting anything, right?
Right.
Does the Buddha reach that state?
Yes.
He does.
Yeah. That's
He
the
doesn't
whole
want
thing.
anything.
That's the whole thing. He discovers that, like, through a lot of practice, he reaches, quote unquote, awakening, enlightenment, nibbana.
Yeah.
And he then, according to the stories, according to the Buddhist text, he actually decides that he's just going to live the rest of his life in solitude and just enjoy not suffering, basically. But his compassion kicks in, and he realizes that there's so many people out there that could use his teachings, and so he decides to
hop back into the world of suffering.
Yeah, but the interesting thing is that even that is a type of compassion that we can't even understand, because it's a desireless compassion. Like
that is weird to me.
Yeah, it's just a compassion that's just there. It's just
you see where I might be
100%.
Yeah.
Like it's the elimination of desire needs to be understood in a narrower sense. So it's not just the elimination of desire. It's the elimination of desire related to the concept of self. So you eliminate self, and there's no reason to desire, because you don't want anything because there's no you.
Yeah.
But you can still be compassionate towards other beings because you don't want them to suffer. But it doesn't mean that you feel bad. It's just you're motivated to do something. So it's not that you want. It's like, you see what I'm saying? Like there's no you, there's no I, there's no ego. So it's not that you want to help them. You don't. It's not that you want to help other beings, sentient beings, because it makes you feel better, or because it makes you feel bad that they suffer. It's just this intrinsic compassion. It's just compassion towards sentient beings.
That right there is.
It's a selfless compassion is a better way to describe it. Totally selfless. So you're not affected by it, but it's there. Like it's something that you've cultivated.
So it's this is a force in itself then.
Yes. Totally empty of self.
Is it conscious?
Well, of course you're still conscious, like there's still conscious experience, but there's like a drive, to help other sentient beings.
Yeah.
So when I say, like when Buddhists say eliminate desire, they really mean greed, hatred, and delusion, or greed, aversion, and delusion.
Yeah.
So it's wanting for yourself, or an aversion for yourself. That feeling towards other beings is totally different. Like that you're not uprooting that. That can stay, because that's like essentially what compassion is.
Yeah.
But that doesn't affect your emotional state or your state of suffering.
This still kind of, like, from my point of view, it still seems to be falling into that whole theme of attraction and aversion. Maybe there is no aversion in the Buddha now. There is definitely an attraction, which is compassion, right?
Right.
That's what has compelled him out of his solitude, is this attraction to do something. And it kind of seems to just still be under that whole thing of attraction and aversion.
For me, in the realm of when talking about the realm of suffering, I've always had the idea that there only is suffering. That there is really no such thing as pleasure. It's like any type of pleasure is just like the best you can feel is no suffering.
Yeah.
And the worst you can feel is total suffering. But there is nothing on the opposite end of the spectrum. Like you can't go from no suffering and then start going positive to pleasure.
Yeah.
Like there is only less and less suffering, and any pleasure that you think you feel is actually just some negative feeling, some bit of suffering that's being taken away.
Okay. So in this case, then, the whole attraction aversion thing, attraction just in its definition, if we're going to be linking it to the suffering concept, attraction is just the negative of aversion.
Well, yeah. So attraction, well, yeah. But that's different, yeah. Because attraction and aversion is just moving towards or away. Really, the opposite of attraction isn't really aversion. It's like repulsion or something.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like...
Yeah, but it under that concept,
Yeah.
attraction is no longer its own thing. It's dependent upon what it's repulsing from.
But where the attraction and repulsion, like, where are you fitting this in? As, like...
Just the basis of any working of... It's the process of everything.
Any system?
Yeah. Like, just from recent literature I've gathered, it seems to be like the main underlying theme of a lot of things, of almost everything. Like, we've used it to kind of explain the whole math thing. And I don't know if we could really use that as like what math is actually doing, but it could definitely be used to... I mean, it's definitely not a case against attraction aversion.
If I had to boil everything down to one concept, I don't know if it would be attraction and aversion or attraction and repulsion, but I see how that does fit. I see how that is a base component. Like, once you do, like, if you do try to boil everything down,
yeah,
that is a piece of what you get. I would agree.
Yeah.
I don't think that's it, but I think that is I think that's a piece for sure.
Because that kind of seems to be, as this is where maybe it's starting to get boiled down to now, because like maybe suffering is the concept, or I don't know, maybe repulsion is the concept, but these seem to be like really huge, just general themes that can encompass a lot of things, and then
like moving towards or away from something.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm trying to get at now is like, what are some themes that we would be moving towards now? Like, so we've gone past knowledge acquisition. We've gone past survival way back. We're now moving towards just basic themes of anything.
Yeah. Meaning? I mean, meaning is is the big one, I think.
I don't know if... Well, you're going to have to explain that. So meaning, because that sounds like... Do you mean meaning as in searching? Because that... When I think of that goes back into attraction.
Right. Attraction towards what, though?
Attraction towards purpose.
Oh, I see. No, for sure. I mean, you're going to get that in anything.
Yeah.
I mean, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Like, anything you do, you're either you're attracting towards something or averting away from something.
Yeah, repulsing or something.
But
yeah, do you see what I'm trying to get at? Like, what are the themes we may be tackling now? Like, just as, like, for the sake of this conversation, like, just hypothesizing or theorizing, whatever. We've gone past survival. Knowledge acquisition is very awesome, is a cool aspect to shoot for, but not as big and generalizing as what I am now seeing as the concept of suffering, and I'm still going to throw it in attraction and repulsion. Because these two things now are just like encompassing not just of living things, they're encompassing everything.
Right. But I'm failing to understand what you mean by themes. Like, what, as far as what, though?
As far as...
Like, as we move forward, like, in this future
in this
civilization?
Future, yeah, like...
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, so what about... Yeah, but I don't think that... I mean, attraction and repulsion that's just something about reality. Yeah. That's just always going to be there.
Yeah, but I also think that's going to be a huge concept when we're no longer having to worry about things like survival.
Really?
Because then that it's going to be the underlying cause of what's the meaning of this? Well, what's the meaning of this is just an attraction towards purpose.
Okay, I see. So you mean like like this is like what philosophers will be talking about then?
Maybe, or yeah, I guess if they're not talking about it now, I would assume people have come upon this question. Like, that I assume everybody who thinks as deeply as maybe we are right now would at some point have come across this.
No, I'm sure they have, but I don't think it's. I mean, it certainly hasn't become like a staple of a philosophical discussion. That's for sure.
Yeah, if that'd have to be something we definitely do have to look up, though, is because like the meaning of life is definitely like has been a persistent theme for as long as we know.
Yeah, absolutely.
That question in itself and what it tries to get at, though, I think is also an interesting one, because, like I said, it's what is that question in itself? It's an attraction towards something.
But I think it really comes down to what, like, people just want to know, how do I not suffer?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what's really driving them.
Yeah,
you know?
And then that's the general theme we're coming back to again is repulsion, suffering. It may just be like in that question of what's my meaning in life, it's a repulsion from something.
But I think the trick is to totally eliminate that.
To eliminate the questioning that.
Yeah, like to eliminate traction or repulsion. Like to land in a neutral place, in a totally impartial place.
Where we no longer want to be repulsing from something anymore.
Or attracting towards something.
That's like, interesting.
To just be, you know? I mean, that's what it's all, like, at least in Buddhist practice, that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
Is eliminating that attraction and repulsion.
Yeah.
The word they use is equanimity. Like a totally impartial state. And it's a place you can get to in really deep meditation.
I want to just like relate this to other things in life, or just in the universe in general. Like, are there things that are not repulsing or attracting towards anything anymore?
No, but I mean, when you use like those concepts, I think the reason I'm having trouble here is because those concepts are just too broad. Like you're gonna find that everywhere, no matter what. Like that is just a thing. Like it's just do you know what I mean? Like there's always gonna be, like something's always going to be attracting or repulsing, but it's even then, like, attraction isn't even the word, because it's just following, it's moving forward in time. You know what I mean? Like it's just there's just a chain of causation. You know, there's really no attraction. It's just a chain of causation, and it can only flow one way. Yeah. It can only flow forward. Like causation you can't go backwards in time. It can only move time can only move forward. And interestingly, that is something that and I don't know exactly what it is that caused this, but there is a quantum reason that happened at the beginning of the Big Bang that caused time to move forward instead of, say, backward. Yeah. Like the way that time was initially brought into existence created it in such a way that it goes forward. Yeah. Yeah. But
imagine that, though, or even try to attempt to imagine that.
Yeah, no, I can't. Fuck? I can't. But what was it? But talking about what will be important in the future, I think that relationships and like interconnectedness is going to become important. And I think that there will be a way in the future to like consciously like commune with people on a like direct level.
You feel like
connecting consciousness, you know?
So mind reading maybe, but maybe even surpassing that?
Yeah, more mind fusion, fusion, you know, like in some way, like it would be like a machine you can hook yourselves up to or something, you know?
Yeah.
And like temporarily fuse your consciousness is together.
Or imagine if we're to take up Max Tegmark's definition of maybe what consciousness is, like working in that realm, and seeing how conscious fusion would work in that. Like that'd be a pretty cool concept, because then
like combining the patterns.
Yeah, or just copying the pattern, or I guess combining the patterns, because when we were faced with that problem of before of becoming somebody and not being able to take that
point of view
back. But that is something interesting, where maybe we would be able to fuse these two perspectives and still take something away. I mean, the fact that we've conceived it right now, it says something.
Yeah, no.
I would say.
Yeah, no, definitely. And
like imagine that like it. So he's got it as information moving in this pattern, and then you just know that as somebody's like pattern. Oh, they have this pattern, or it's like it's somebody's telephone number. This is how I reach them. Now this is their pattern. Let me see what they're thinking or seeing or experiencing.
And the interesting thing is that consciousness at that point, is it just going to be known that like the sense of self is an illusion? Like, why? What do you live for anymore once like we have that much of an understanding? Like, because when I think about like consciousness in super intelligent AI, I always imagine it without a sense of self, like how it just understands that that's just an illusion. And so, you know, the teleporter paradox, where like if you use how it destroys you and just remakes a perfect copy. Like I always imagine that a super intelligent AI that's conscious is just going to it's just going to be with that knowledge, and it's going to understand it on a level where it doesn't care. So like sending its information somewhere else, it's going to be everywhere at once anyways, and so it's really not going to have that solid sense of self. It's going to be far more fluid. And when you get to that point, then what's left? You know, like what's the point of everything? Because like you're not trying to do anything anymore, and you can change your conscious experience on the turn of a dime. You know, like so. I don't know. That's interesting to think about. Yeah. Like, what is the human race just going to dissolve? Like, is the consciousness of the human race just going to dissolve into this random experience, like just popping up and fading away, and then eventually just like, since there's no one that really is like driving to like stay existent anymore, it's just all going to fade off? And like, what if civilizations have already reached that point, and there's just like a giant computer floating in the cosmos, just like dead, like inert, and like there's just experience kind of like popping up and fading away, and there's no self, so there's no motivation, and it's just kind of, and there's no suffering anymore. That's been eliminated. So it's just like this giant computer filled with conscious pleasure, just arising and passing away, and just, you know what I mean? Yeah. And like, if we're not careful, that is a future like that is where we'd be heading. Like the more you take consciousness for what it truly is and take advantage of that, the less and less you become a person, an individual. Like you just, like, yes, we know that we're just conscious, like we're just experiences arising, passing away, but we're experiences arising, passing away that are bound up in these individual bodies. Once you eliminate that, there's nothing left. Like that is literally the only thing holding us together, is the physical matter.
Yeah.
Once you take consciousness out of that, it's over.
Yeah.
Like
it's
there's
just nothing.
It's just nothing. It's not nothing. It's conscious experience, but it's not bound by anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's just conscious experiences like floating around. And I think that,
is there a possibility that we are just conscious experiences just floating around?
no, that is what we are.
Yeah,
but we're bound in a singular spot.
Yeah.
And like that's why the sense of self arises, because of that binding of experience, we have memory, and we relate to our past selves, and like even when you know how different you used to be, you still think like that consciousness was me, just like this consciousness now is, But once you take that away, there's nothing remaining,
All right, and with that, I do have work in a bit, and this is our first episode to the pseudo-intellectuals.
It will only get better, that's for certain.
It'll only get better, or who knows, depending on what your thoughts on this were. Maybe it'll only get worse. Those of you who think that, we don't give a fuck anyways. We're going to keep moving forward and attracting or repulsing from the haters.
But definitely give us feedback. We don't have a Twitter or anything yet, but that's in the works. And you'll be able to find us in the next episode. We'll give that address. But right now we do have a Patreon. It's patreon.com/the pseudo-intellectuals podcast, and you can leave feedback there. And if you want us to continue making this, eventually we could start releasing episodes twice weekly, 3 times weekly, if we actually got support. So if you'd like to do that, you're welcome to. And that's it, I think.
All right, I think that's it.